this movement, whatever the movement is always bigger than you. It's a community effort to help somebody else.
It's human nature for us to take care of each other.
People are standing up and saying, I want to do my part in some small way.
Move on makes things happen. And that's what we need. A way to get involved, a way to stay involved.
It's like a ripple effect.
Neighbors and communities talking about things that matter and then ensuring that those voices and those interests are heard in a meaningful way is how we are able to make an impact.
Anybody can learn how to do this. I went from being immobilized to being a thriving organizer and mobilizer with Move On's help.
And good evening, Move On. Good evening, Progressive Power Summit. My name is Darrell Douglas. Welcome to the main stage. We've got a fun day for you today. What an awesome opportunity to be talking about democracy with the women's marches that are going on across the nation. We've got that pretty much being on our main stage. Since folks are joining us from across the country, we want you to share in the chat your first name and where you're joining us from, and what your favorite session has been thus far for the Progressive Power Summit. This session, like so many others, is supposed to be interactive, so that means you can actually take part in it. The panelists, as they're speaking, are going to be referring back to the chat, and so you really want to put some of your responses in there. I see we have Toby from Maine. We have Aganita Varkentine, who's from, she can say where she's from. Delynn Fairfax, who's an amazing volunteer and member with Move On from Tucson, Arizona. A lot of awesome stuff going on in Arizona. We have Evelyn Malone. Everyone knows Miss Evelyn, who's in Illinois. Casey Barnett, who's back to Bay 2 from Austin, Texas. Lots of Texans in the chat. We see Monica Tristan from San Antonio, Texas. Very grateful to be here and absolutely in awe of everyone helping. Mary Button, who's one of the volunteers in the chat. It's a lot of action going on with the Progressive Power Summit. So we want to know where you're from. I'll go first. As I said, I'm Darrell. I'm from Houston, Texas, but I travel back and forth between there and Detroit, where I am today. And before I introduce the panelists for this session, we want to go ahead and acknowledge a couple of other folks. We have Cindy Bigley, Olivia Dreyer, who's in Pennsylvania but dialing in from New Jersey. We have Amanda DeStefano. We have James Riley from Vista, California. Y'all keep it going in the chat. Not only comment on what you see on the screen, but also comment with each other. It's a great way to be engaged and involved. So let me welcome our panel speakers who will share more of the attacks we're facing and what we can do to win. Joining us today is Texas State Representative Jasmine Crockett, who represents the 100th district in Texas, I believe, a Democrat representing part of Dallas, and the Texas State House of Representatives, who was among those fleeing to Washington, D.C. to break the quorum in the final hours of the May 2021 legislative session down in Texas. We also have the amazing Reverend Liz Theo Harris, who's an American theologian and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, with Reverend Barber, who I'm pretty sure a lot of you know. With it being a national call for moral revival, and the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice at Union Theological Seminary. She's an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. And lastly, one of my colleagues, Emma Einhorn, is a campaign director with Move On. You may have gotten one or hundreds, or it probably feels like thousands of emails from her. And she'll let us know what Move On is doing specifically when it comes to upholding our democracy. There's a lot of work going on in Move On, and it's because of you. So without further ado, Emma Einhorn.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Before we get too deep into this session, I don't want to bury the lead. We need you to take action to protect our freedom to vote. So please sign the petition, go to moveon.org/democracy, where we are asking President Biden to do everything he can to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, including eliminate the filibuster, this arcane rule that we will get to that is preventing this from becoming law. So once again, that is moveon.org/democracy to sign the petition to try to protect our freedom to vote. So voting rights and ensuring that we have a voice in our government is fundamental to creating the change we want to see. If we could bring up my screen share. So this is the cycle of advocacy that we use at Move On. We could be in multiple parts of the cycle at any time, and we need all three of these in order to create the change that we want to see in the world. We advocate. We advocate for change with tactics like calling our members of Congress and holding rallies and showing public support for the policies that we want. We also participate in elections, and we work to get folks elected who believe in the issues and values that we support. And then we hold people accountable. If you don't vote with us, or if you are blocking the change that we want to see in the world, we want to make sure everyone knows that. We talk to voters about that, and we do some public shaming tactics to make sure that folks know whose side you are on. And if we lose our freedom to vote, we take out a whole chunk of this cycle through elections, and that is our voice in our government, the place that we want to create the change that we want to see. So that is why voting rights is so essential to everything that we care about. If we break this cycle, we break an essential piece of the ways we mobilize for change. And so that's why we're here today to talk about protecting our freedom to vote. A couple examples of how Move On is working to create change here. In 2020, we endorsed and campaigned for candidates who support voting rights. And you know what? We won. We won the White House, we won the House, and we won the Senate. And so now we are advocating our butts off. We have made hundreds of thousands of calls to Congress. We have had thousands of people attend rallies across the country. We have written letters to our senators. We have promoted the work of folks like Representative Crockett on this call today, who traveled to DC to protect the freedom to vote in her home state of Texas. We have delivered tens of thousands of petition signatures. And we're also holding people accountable. We have run an entire campaign against Senator Johnson, who fueled the insurrection, who is trying to make sure that our votes don't count in elections. And so we've done some polling in his state. We had a billboard truck running around in Wisconsin to make sure that folks know what he's doing. And so we are mobilizing all forces to make sure that we can protect our freedom to vote. And the reason we're doing this is because we have a solution to all of these state attacks that you might have seen across the country. There have been over 400 bills introduced this year to restrict our freedom to vote. And so we cannot let this stand. That's why we're organizing for something called the Freedom to Vote Act, which is a bill in the Senate right now that would protect our freedom to vote. It has three main components. The first is voting rights. It would make Election Day a national holiday. It would require all states to have a period of early voting available to all voters, and it would create some national standards to make sure that everyone has access to the ballot. It also addresses money in politics. It has a pilot program to do some public funding of campaigns to try to reduce the influence of big money. It has transparency and ethics provisions in it to make sure that we understand the influence of big money in our politics and we are able to curb that power. And it also covers redistricting. Redistricting is when every 10 years we redraw the lines for our congressional districts and decide what areas are going to be represented by different representatives in the House. And so that process has become completely partisan in some states where our politicians get to choose their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. So it would end this partisan gerrymandering and make sure that everyone gets a say in our government. But somehow, even though the Republicans are in the minority and all Democrats support this Freedom to Vote Act, we are still not able to get it to come up for a vote right now. And that is because the Republicans are abusing something called the Jim Crow filibuster. And we are going to watch a short video from Move On's creative team that walks us through what this is. Pardon me one moment while I change the screen share.
Another episode of That's Racist.
Oh no. Please forgive my technical difficulties.
Episode of That's Racist.
Maybe this is not going to work, and I'm just going to describe to you what the filibuster is instead of watching this video. I apologize. I will get the link to someone so that they can put the video in the chat so folks can watch this later if you would like. But the filibuster is an arcane rule in the Senate that requires 60 votes in order to bring something up for a vote on the floor, which allows the Republicans who are in the minority to block things from even coming to a vote. The history of this filibuster is that it was used over 300 times to prevent anti-lynching laws from becoming law. And this is not something that we should support. If it is blocking things as uncontroversial as saying lynching is bad, this is a rule that should be gotten rid of. And we need all of our senators to vote to eliminate the filibuster so that we can bring the Freedom to Vote Act up for a vote. So none of this is new, all of these attacks. White supremacists have restricted voting for generations. And now we're going to talk to some of our amazing panelists about what we've learned from previous fights, how this is playing out in the states, and what we can do to win. So thank you, Reverend Theo Harris and Representative Crockett, for joining us today. Rep. Theo Harris, I will ask you first, what lessons from the civil rights movement and other campaigns for voting rights does the Poor People's Campaign draw from when you're doing your work today?
Well, thanks so much. It's great to be here and so excited to be among so many activists that are fighting to defend this democracy and to really lift from the bottom so that everybody in our society can rise and be represented and thrive. And so indeed, we have great history to go back on. And that's part of why it is such a shame, right? Those 400 bills that have been introduced, it's the greatest attack on our voting rights since Reconstruction, since right after the Civil War. And so therefore we can go back to Reconstruction, we can go back to the Civil Rights Movement and learn that where we're able to expand our democracy is when people are activated and organized and pushing, even when the politicians are saying, no, we can't do it, right? If we think about Selma, we think about a couple weeks before that Selma to Montgomery march, Lyndon Baines Johnson was saying, no, we can't do it. We just can't expand voting rights. We cannot pass a Voting Rights Act, right? And this is after the 64 Civil Rights Act, which was inadequate. It's after the 50 6 of 57, another kind of piece of legislation that was inadequate. But when people organize and are not stopped by racist mobs, are not stopped by the threats that are real, are very real in our communities all across the country right now, but insist that it does not have to be this way, that we have the power, that we are going to push and we are going to win this expansion, we can learn from this. Because then the power is in the hands, in the bodies, in the minds of the people. And right now, we have across the country people, a vast majority of folks that want to expand voting rights. As you said, Emma, we saw a 2020 election where people voted in folks that said we were going to expand voting rights. We were going to make election day and a holiday. We are going to have automatic registration. We need to see this done. And the way it's going to get done is if we stay activated, we stay organized, we keep on pushing, and we, absolutely reject this filibuster and any lies that this is about upholding, any kind of structure that is about justice and fairness. That is simply not true. So anyone, Democrat, Republican, anyone independent that says that the filibuster is there because it's going to help make things better for us, we see a history of this filibuster being used to really justify and enable racism. And anything less than that, and getting rid of the filibuster is not enough. And we need to get rid of it so we can pass voting rights, but also so we can expand healthcare and raise wages and do all the things that people all across this country, especially the 140 million people who are poor and low income before the pandemic and who have been hurt even more, who are live in the richest country in the world and yet are living in impoverished democracy right now.
So if you agree with Reverend Theo Harris that we need to abolish the filibuster, head over to moveon.org/democracy and add your name to the petition today, because as she just said, we all need to be in the streets. We need to be visible. We need to be active. And that is how we're going to win this fight. Thank you so much. Representative Crockett, millions of us watched as you valiantly fought back against Republicans in your home state of Texas to protect our freedom to vote. What do you want people to know about your struggle and why it's so important that we pass the Freedom to Vote Act?
First of all, thank you, Move On, for everything that you do. And thank you, Rev. Some people talk the talk and others walk the walk. And let me tell you something. I only know this great woman because she's been in the streets, right? She's been in her streets, the streets of DC. She's been all over because it's just that serious. And so it's important that we all understand that we can't just rely on people like Rev and her counterpart, Reverend Barber. We can't do that. They are doing such great work, and Move On is doing such great work. But at the end of the day, it takes all of us. It's not just one singular voice. It's the collective voice of the majority that will move the needle. And so, we are ground zero for everything that's bad, right? I'm at the Capitol right now because we're having the Women's Repro March today. And it's here at the Capitol. I'm headed to Dallas to join in on that march as soon as I get done with you guys. And, the reason that we're having to do this is because we've not had the justice that we deserve in the legislature, as well as in the judiciary, right? We see that the judiciary is failing us at the highest levels right now as well. And so I'm going to add that I'm advocating for expanding the court right now, too. I know that that's not what we're talking about, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about whatever laws it is that we get in place, we have to at least have a judiciary that has the courage to follow the law. And right now, I'm concerned that the highest court is skipping out on their responsibility of following what we would consider to be precedents. And so they are the same ones that gutted the Voting Rights Act and acted as if we didn't have to worry about the racial component of it. That was a non-issue nowadays. But we see what's going on in Texas. We see what's happened with redistricting, right? So I'm in the middle of that fight right now. And to be perfectly honest, I am ready to lace up my shoes and throw them the deuces again. We will see what happens, right? But at the end of the day, it's not just a matter of access to the ballot box. It's also redistricting. And so it's important because I feel like redistricting kind of gets like a back seat, but it's a 1-2 punch. The two go hand in hand. For so long, so many people have said things like, my vote doesn't count. They say things like that because we end up with a legislature that truly doesn't represent the people. And they are trying to do that on the federal level right now. A lot of these Congress, let me applaud Congress. Let me applaud the U.S. House. The House has done their part. They have passed every piece of legislation that we need them to pass. They understand what all is at stake. And frankly, many of them will be out, not because the people don't want them there, but because of the state houses that have decided that they want to change what representation looks like, especially in a state like Texas. I kept telling people 95% of the growth in this state, and I would argue even more than that, has been driven by people of color. And so we ended up getting 2 new congressional seats. And I thought that was the worst thing ever. I was like, honestly, we need to let those seats stay where they are. I was like, leave it in California, leave it in New York, leave it somewhere else, because we're not going to get this right. And sure enough, the very first iteration of the maps that we saw from our state Senate created 2 new seats. Those 2 new seats are 2 new Anglo seats. Now, you tell me how the math works out on that when a congressional seat is 766,000 people. And over the last decade, Anglos grew at a rate of 180,000 total. So you tell me if that looks like fairness. And this idea that is partisanship is racism. Like, I need people to understand what's going on, right? Like, they want to talk about, oh, it's partisanship. No, it's racist, okay? Because here's the deal. Latinos actually were the ones that really drove the growth in this state. Over 2 million new Latinos, and you're telling me you couldn't find a way to create a brown seat? Like, I mean, it doesn't, it's just, so this is what I'm dealing with in the state of Texas. We know that they are disproportionately attacking Black and brown people, and definitely those that are struggling socioeconomically, right? They want to make it so much harder. There's no reason that we can't have online voter registration. Now, I know that their claim to fame was fraud, but we all know that the only frauds are the Republicans, right? Like, I mean, that's just what it is. Like, there was no voter fraud. You are the frauds, right? Because you've got to think about it in this way. For them to claim that all of these elections were stolen and fraudulent, and I'm thinking, so you're claiming that you're illegitimate and you shouldn't be in your seat either. And frankly, I believe that I am legitimate. I do believe that there should have been a larger group of people that were probably able to access the ballot box. I do think that we have lived in a state that has been suppressed for so long. And so there were those that thought we were dramatic for walking out. And then there were those that kind of really started to realize there's some serious issues going on, not just in Texas, but throughout the country. And so I thank God that we were able to get over 50 people to say, we will not only walk out of the state house, but we will leave the state. We will risk arrest. In fact, that's my warrant back there that my team made sure they framed. But, we walked out, and honestly, it changed the course of the conversation. Most people don't know that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which is really trying to reinstitute portions of the original Voting Rights Act, it's trying to kind of put pieces of that puzzle back together for us to protect us. Most people don't realize that when John Lewis was alive, they were trying to get that passed. Like, they've been trying for 8 years. And so here it is. We finally have a majority. And there was this movement that really moved voting rights to the forefront of the conversation, to the point that they couldn't ignore it, to the point that the rest of the country was waking up and realizing we've got some significant problems. And it's because Republicans are afraid that when people make it to the ballot box, they will lose. So, it's been dramatic to say the least in the state of Texas. I've got colleagues that are so mad, right? When they see me walking down the hall, they just kind of turn their head. And I'm like, it is what it is. You don't have to worry about this type of response from me if you just stop doing racist things. For our Speaker of the House to say when they were debating this bill on the floor, you are not allowed to use the R word because you're afraid of it. I'm like, listen, I'm not here to tiptoe around and make you feel good. If you are doing things that are racist, I am obligated as a Black woman to tell you that you are wrong. I'm not going to give you a pass. And so I'm holding strong. I'm good. I'm just trying to make sure that I represent for the people, because that's what the people deserve.
Reverend Crockett, amazing. We are so grateful that you're able to join us here today, and so thankful that you are headed out to a women's march after this. And we hope as many people as possible who can make it to marches today or throughout the weekend can, and just stay involved in this fight, because you can see how important it is that we are all active and all protect our freedom to vote, that all of our rights are based on. If we lose our freedom to vote, we lose the ability to influence our government and the ability to create the change that we want to see. So we've got a couple more questions for our panelists here. And I also invite you, if you have questions, please write them in the chat, and our fabulous chat moderators will gather those questions, and we will try to get to some audience questions at the end if we can here. Representative Crockett, you touched on this in your last remarks, so I'm going to send this question to you first. But we are all impacted by restricting our access to vote. So why is it so important that specific communities are impacted more in these restrictions?
Yeah, so literally talking about exactly what they're trying to do in redistricting. And they're taking advantage of the fact that working people really aren't the ones that can stay. They don't have the ability to stay in tune with this and track this day to day or come and testify, because we're going to start testimony on Monday. That's a work day. Most people can't say, hey, let me head to Austin on a work day because I've got to fight for this, right? And so they're taking advantage of the fact that it's and making it more cumbersome. And the thing is, we know who is disproportionately affected by so many of these things. This is why we see laws that don't really match up with who we are as people, because we make it to only where there's a privileged group of people that really have reasonable and easy access. And those are the ones that end up with laws that benefit them. But that's when we look at things and we say, well, why are the 1%ers not being taxed at a higher rate? But those of us that are going to work and living check to check are really living check behind check, right? If we're getting a check at all, right? We don't have representation that actually reflects our actual will, the will of the people. And so it is important that we do our parts. We've got to find allies. The reality is that we're all in this together. And so if you're somebody that is privileged enough to be able to take off work, or you're in a situation that you just aren't working right now, then we need you to show up and speak up for everybody else. We need people to understand that it can't be about me, 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 me. If we all win, that means that we all participate. So it is important that we understand that our role is to make sure that we speak up for those that can't speak up for themselves. And so with that, I do want to implore each and every one of you to make sure that you're finding out about these redistricting hearings, to make sure that you can look and see, what do these maps look like? What communities of interest are they breaking up? What minorities are losing representation? Because that's what they're doing in Texas.
So I think it's really important that we think about this question of how, yes, everybody is impacted by an impoverished democracy, right? When we attack our democracy, when we make it harder for people to vote, when we close polling places, when we put dark money in politics, this absolutely has an impact on the entire nation and on just the fabric of our democracy. But what we also can see is that because of racist voter suppression laws, we smuggle people into office that then pass policies that hurt workers of all races, that hurt immigrants, that hurt women and queer people and LGBTQ folks. The states that have passed racist voter suppression laws, in the last decade, are the states with the highest poverty numbers. And those are highest poverty numbers amongst people of color, amongst children, amongst women, amongst white people, right? I mean, so what we see is that by denying our democracy, by impoverishing it, by making it harder to vote, and particularly, making it harder for disabled folks, for elderly folks, for young folks, for Black folks, for Latino folks, for Indigenous folks to vote, for poor folks to vote, that what we have is a democracy that's really significantly in peril, and that brings life down for absolutely everybody. And what does it say, right? I want us to think for a minute. What does it say that that basically with the voter suppression laws that have been passed and introduced since 2020, November of 2020, we would have 55 to 65 million voters that would have been disenfranchised. What does it say that people, our elected officials, want to pass policies that get people not to vote? This is supposed to be a democracy, which means that every person should have a vote, and that those votes should then be able to shape the policies that are passed that impact everybody, but obviously impact those that are poor and low income and marginalized by far the most. And so this has to be a fight that everybody takes up, because who wants to live in a society where because we're allowing for this kind of voter suppression to take place, this redistricting to take place, this disenfranchisement to take place, the closing of poll places, the denying of students from being able to use their IDs, all of the things that are going on. And it's many, many things. It's not just one thing. And that's why we need, expansion of voting rights, starting with the Freedom to Vote Act. There isn't enough there, to be honest. We've worked with our voting rights lawyers, and they're showing a bunch of the stuff that we really need in there, and we need more. But we have to start. We have to protect this democracy, because what is it that we live in the richest country in the world, and yet, and 55% of low-income voters, voted for folks that said they would raise wages, said that we would, expand voting rights, said that we would expand healthcare, that we would have a pathway to citizenship. I mean, all of these different, policies that again, the majority of people across the country support. And yet, because of this attack on our democracy, and because of some of the politicians that have too much power that is not given to them by the people, elected by the people, but is that they get because of voter suppression and an attack on voting rights. What is it that they have that power, and what is our role as activists, as organizers, as just regular people in our communities? What we need to do is come forward and fight and educate ourselves and insist that not on our watch, because it doesn't have to be this way.
Reverend Harris, I could not agree more. The Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, they are the floor, not the ceiling. These are common sense things to just level the playing field and make sure that everyone can cast their ballot. So I asked to both of you, if you could wave a magic wand and make any voting rights law real, or just where do you see the future of this democracy work going after these two bills?
Yeah, so I'll just say that, listen, we're struggling in Texas. I'll take anything. I know that people are like, Jasmine, that's not progressive. And I was like, you need to understand what being a progressive is in the state of Texas. It's just saying, hey, I'm not trying to go back 50 years, okay? Like it is so bad. And here's the deal. So that people really understand the context, what we would do is we would set a floor in the Freedom to Vote Act that would really kind of be a basic that's guaranteed to every state in this country, because access to the ballot box is not equal throughout this country, right? And so there's so much more that we could get, right? And it was really in For the People, right? So we got so much more in For the People Act. But the deal is, it raises the floor so much for Texas that I'm like, I don't really care. And I don't have the luxury of time. I am running out of time right now, because the Republicans see the writing on the wall here in the state of Texas. And that's why we ended up with this terrible draconian voter suppression bill. And so many of the things that they're trying to implement in this bill would be null and void if we were able to even just kind of raise the floor for what we have in the state of Texas. And so as non-progressive as that may be, you've got to understand kind of the different positions that some of us find ourselves in, and the sense of urgency. Have y'all seen Abbott lately? I got to get him out, right? So I'll do anything, right? Because here's the deal. We were talking about a total of maybe 200,000 votes that made the difference when Beto ran against Ted Cruz. And so 200,000 votes in the state of Texas, that's the size of almost 30 million people, that is a drop in the bucket. And so we know that if we can do simple things like, for instance, Texas was found to be violating federal law already as it relates to people being able to register to vote when they actually renew their driver's license. And so in the midst of the pandemic, obviously most people were renewing their driver's license online, but there was not an option to renew your driver's license online here in the state of Texas, which was a violation of federal law. And so we have the infrastructure for it now because they had to. And between September of last year and August of this year, there were 1 million newly registered people just by doing online voter registration when people renew their license. We only renew once every 5 years, right? So, like, you can imagine what it would be if we had something as simple, like, that's one thing. That's one freaking thing, okay? So, like, something simple like that would make a huge difference in really a state that has way too many daggone electors. It affects the entire country. That's what people need to understand. If you can change the results in Texas alone, you change, first of all, the Republicans don't get the White House back. Like, they don't. You can't get to the White House as a Republican without Texas. So it really does have kind of this trickle effect where it really has the ability to positively impact the entire country if we could do just some very simple things in the state of Texas. So I'm going to tell you right now that being a progressive in the state of Texas means that I just want something. Give me anything. And I'll take it, and we'll have the ability to then go in and make sure that we have real representation, because the redistricting part, once again, I still don't feel like redistricting gets the attention that it needs. But when I tell you the growth and I tell you the seats that they set up, they have decided to ignore the fact that, well, Texas does what it does. They only want minority bodies, right, for the count, so they can get the power. But they don't want to give the power to the people that are actually allowing us to actually get these 2 new seats, right? And so if we can get the redistricting, if we can get to the point that we're looking at pre-clearance, Texas has always been found to be intentionally discriminatory. Like, that's what they do, also known as being racist. You know, so even with this growth, we saw that Sheila Jackson Lee, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and Al Green, 2 people that were on the front lines of fighting against the voter suppression laws in the state of Texas, 2 of our Congress people that actually got arrested. What did they decide to do? They threw them in the same district. They paired them while creating 2 new Anglo seats. Now, you tell me if that's racist or not. I mean, it is what it is, right? But if I get this, then that means that there's oversight over the racist actions that happen in Texas. And hopefully the state that actually has more African Americans than any other state can finally get the representation that it deserves and get from under this gun, because the Republicans keep saying, well, elections have consequences. I get that, right? But you cheated. You are only in power because that's the only way that you can be in power, is by cheating. And so my last and final point is, I am tired of the federal elected officials. I was nice at the beginning of all this fight, right? And I was like, oh, you know, I get it, because legislation can take time. But we are in an existential crisis right now, not only in Texas, but in this country. And the fact that, God bless the president, okay? God bless him. And I get infrastructure matters. But nothing can matter more than voting rights. That is the bottom line. We don't get any legislation that we need in this country until we at least get basic voting rights. Everything is connected to that. Everything as it relates to where we live, how we can work, if we get to live, it's all connected to voting, right? And so we need to make that the primary focus. I am so tired of, well, we're fighting about the infrastructure bill. That's cool. Can we work on the infrastructure of our democracy? And then we can get back to that other stuff, because let me tell you something. You continue to let the Republicans play y'all and run over y'all, then what's going to happen is half of y'all not going to be in office ever again. Because they already know. This is the first time that in this country, when we looked at the U.S. Census, there was a decline as it relates to Anglos. The writing is on the wall, and they are nervous. And so they will do everything to destroy our democracy. I'm off my soapbox.
And what a wonderful soapbox it is. I could not agree more. We are in a 5-alarm fire, and it is time for people to start reacting like that, and for our elected officials to pull out all the stops and change the rules, because the rules aren't working. The rules, or they're working as they were designed, to keep us down and to keep the rich and white and powerful in power, because that's how they wrote them, to keep themselves in power. And so if you agree, go to moveon.org/democracy, sign the petition today, and stay involved in this community so that we can all be working to protect our freedom to vote. We are running out of time, so I'm going to do one last question, or take 2 questions from the audience that are sort of 2 sides of the same coin, and ask Reverend Theo Harris. We have Robert, who I think may live in a red state, who says, how do I impact those who don't agree with us, and try to get them to support voting rights? And then we have a question for Rachel, who I think probably lives in a blue state, who says, what do I do? My representatives agree. How can I help people in other areas with their representatives?
So this is a great series of questions, right? Because again, the power lies in us. The power lies in us to come together, work with people, convince people that don't agree with us, and then also to see that even if our representative, even if our whole state, and there really are almost no states that are all doing well. So, but that it is indeed our responsibility to be thinking about the whole of our democracy, because again, it impacts us all. I mean, that's why the Poor People's Campaign has been doing a lot of work in West Virginia at the lead of the West Virginia Poor People's Campaign. You know, poor and low income folks who have been sounding the alarm that the vast majority of Republicans, Democrats, and independents in West Virginia support the expansion of voting rights and support a broad kind of budget. And yet we have folks blocking, like Joe Manchin, the passing of voting rights, the passing of a broad budget bill, the passing of raising of wages, and all of this, and blocking by using this racist filibuster, right? So what can we do? I mean, what we can do is connect with people all over our communities and get involved. So that means getting involved in the work that Move On is doing. That means getting involved in the work that other grassroots organizations, if you're not already involved in the Poor People's Campaign, we're organized in almost every state. And folks are out there, protesting, but then also using all of the tools of social media in this pandemic and everything to be pushing. Right now, we poor and low income people make up 1/3 of the electorate. And yet, if we look at who is being most impacted by this attack on our democracy, that it is again, poor and low income people. So what you can do is both educate yourself and your community about these issues. Surely sign on to the petitions, but get involved in the local online and in-person protests that are happening. Making sure you're calling Congress, you're calling the Senate to make sure that folks are clear that if they do not pass these democracy advancement bills, that it's not because the people don't want them. And the majority of people are on the side of these issues. And so if you're in a district that your representatives already are supportive, you know what? There are folks across Texas, there are folks across West Virginia, there are folks across other parts of the country that need people to say, well, what you're doing in Texas, what you're doing in West Virginia doesn't just affect West Virginia, it affects all of us. And so please, please, please do the right thing. And so I hope that people do realize that we have a power to be able to come forward and stand for these issues.
Thank you so much, Reverend Theo Harris and Representative Crockett, both for joining us here today and sharing all of your wisdom with Move On members, and for being the incredible movement leaders that you are. If you enjoyed hearing from the Reverend and the Representative, please sound off in the chat right now and let them know your appreciation, and follow them on social media. Join the Poor People's Campaign, follow what's happening in Texas, and join your local organizations to get involved and to get out in the streets. Because as we just heard, Rev. Harris said, we are the majority. And we know from history that when the majority is loud and in the streets and organized, we can win. We heard from Representative Crockett how these laws are racist and they're being applied in racist ways. And we need to be mobilizing because everything depends on voting rights. Every issue that we care about is intertwined. And if we lose our freedom to vote, we lose the White House, we lose the House, we lose the Senate, we lose our ability to change the government that affects so many pieces of our lives. And we also heard that while the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act are the floor, not the ceiling, they're also essential and like really, really urgent. If we do not act now, we have an election coming up in just 1 year, and we can lose all of the gains that we have gotten over the past year. And so this is something that we need to be talking about now. This is something that needs to pass Congress as soon as possible. So encourage folks to go to moveon.org/democracy to sign the petition, to stay involved, and to get involved in all of the other great organizations that you've heard about today. So thank you so much for joining, and I will throw it back to Darrell to let us know what's coming up the rest of today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And y'all, let's hear it for Reverend Liz Theo Harris. Like, wow, right? And you know what? I had a little tear in my eye because I'm from Texas listening to Representative Crockett. Like, wow. Like, you know, they say, you know, she said, you know, elections have consequences. And the people of the 100th district in Texas are like, wow. And I'll say this too, before we get to the next part, like her staff is fired too. Like they were reaching out. I think her name is Jacqueline, I want to say, reaching out to get people to testify on her bills. Like if we can elect more people like Jasmine Crockett, we can fix all of this, right? And so if you want to learn more about that, we got a session for that. So at 1:10 p.m., there's a session called How Georgia Flipped Blue and how to replicate this in your state. That starts at 1:10. At the same time, Level Up Your Fields game is happening. And then leveraging social media for digital organizing is also happening at 1:10. And then I'm really excited about this one because I'm actually moderating it with Houston City Council member Tiffany Thomas, who ran for office while working full time, right? And won her race. There are a lot of people who are on this call or on this in this summit right now, the Progressive Power Summit, and you know you've been thinking about running. So we're going to have a conversation. She's going to give the nuts and bolts of what it felt like to actually do it, where to start, to kind of get it going, because those of you that are out there are just like Representative Crockett. You know you were on the edge of your seat as she was speaking. We're also going to have Your Story Adds Power and a platforms and petitions session as well at 2. Then you got a lunch break, and then you can come back. We're going to talk about climate justice, power mapping, and self-care during hectic campaign seasons. That's going to be a really cool one. And then we have a break, and y'all don't forget about this. There are a lot of people who are in the chat that are from different cities and different states that are here at this summit. We're going to have actual individual caucus spaces, right, that are separated by the regions of the United States. I'm planning on joining the one for the South because I'm originally from Texas. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's brewing up. Go ahead, get your coffee, get your water, do what you have to do, and don't miss the next sessions, which start in roughly 17 minutes. And with that, see you later.
Thanks, everyone.
This movement, whatever the movement is always bigger than you. It's a community effort to help somebody else.
It's human nature for us to take care of each other.
People are standing up and saying, I want to do my part in some small way.
Move on makes things happen. And that's what we need. A way to get involved, a way to stay involved.
It's like a ripple effect.
Neighbors and communities talking about things that matter, and then ensuring that those voices and those interests are heard in a meaningful way is how we are able to make an impact.
Anybody can learn how to do this. I went from being immobilized to being a thriving organizer and mobilizer with Move On's help.